these stories never stop. And the one story that will clearly never stop is what happened after 9/11. And I remember I was in the West Bank at the time, and I was driving down the road with a friend, and I called a friend, and I said, you do realize that from now on, every single story we do for the next 20, 30 years is going to be about what happened today. And essentially, I mean, it's not completely true, but it's pretty true. So you're driven, I think, as a foreign correspondent to pursue these stories and to keep going, and not just to say they're done. One of the jobs of a foreign correspondent, and I think just a job of any news journalist, is to find little places of darkness in the world and to shine some light on it. And someone asked me, I was talking to some of you earlier today, you know, how much good can you do as a journalist and as a foreign correspondent? You go out there, you see so much injustice, and I had to say to him, it's limited. It is. You can try, but all you can essentially do is to shine a light on those places of darkness. And then it's, in a sense, it's up to politicians and policymakers and soldiers, military people to do something, and NGO workers, aid workers to do something after that. But you can keep shining a light on it. And as we know, our dear friend and colleague at Newsday, formerly of Newsday, like some of us, Roy Gutman is the ultimate example of this. Now, Roy discovered essentially the Bosnian Serb concentration camps. This is again going back to the Balkans. I'm sorry, it's a very old war. But instantly, Washington was abuzz about this. And I mean, I would suggest that Roy personally saved many people's lives, because these camps were quickly shut down because of the spotlight that, that journalists, including Roy, and he was the first, shone on this story. And some of them risked their lives doing this. And I think, you know, it's the is it worth it calculation is something that we go through the whole time. Let me tell you another sort of, this is what happens. Whenever any journalist gets killed or gets injured or gets kidnapped, there's a sort of hush for 10 minutes, and people say, oh, that's terrible. And when I say people, I'm talking about colleagues, friends, and other journalists. And then someone will say, yeah, but what were they doing on that road at night? That was so dumb. Well, it is dumb. It's a stupid job. And if you get caught, and if you die, or if you get captured and put in prison, then you're wrong. You have de facto made a mistake. But the secret is that you actually make mistakes 99 times out of 100, and you get away with them, and you look clever and brave and so on. But really, it's a calculation that you're making, and some things you cannot control, to put it mildly. So you do the calculation in terms of risk analysis, and it's very unscientific, and it's very gut-oriented and very personal. And happily, I've never, ever experienced, I don't know anyone who has, pressure from editors saying, you know, I think you should go in. And it's entirely up to you, and you learn to make those decisions. There are two other reasons that I'll just touch on, and then I'll open it up to questions, why I continue to do this job, and I think why a lot of people do. And these are not very noble reasons. I've sort of been talking about the impulse to shed light where there is darkness, and it's not always like that. The fact is that it's incredibly intense, and so you become incredibly good friends with people. And a friend of mine from the Washington Post described being a foreign correspondent like this. You get a call from your editor, he says, right, go to the airport. So you go to the airport. You take a flight to a country you've never been to before. At the airport, you get a taxi. You get a taxi to the edge of the forest. In the forest, you get a donkey, and the donkey takes you to a clearing in the middle of the forest after hours. And there are all your best friends. And it's really like that. the amount of times I've walked into hotels or, walked down rubble-strewn streets around the world and bumped into, some of my best friends, and it's not even surprising anymore, and you become incredibly close. And it's an unusual form of journalism in that you are competitive, but you're also primarily a team, and you're looking out for each other. And it took me a few months when I was first a correspondent to understand that, because you want to keep your stories to yourself and your contacts to yourself. No, it doesn't work that way. If you give what you receive what you give, and you give what you receive in this world, and as a foreign correspondent. So, I mean, I would basically give any contact to just about anyone, unless they were clearly just a very, very direct competitor. And, I got married a couple of years ago, and a good sort of 30 people there had come from all around the world, from various newspapers and broadcasters, and it's great. So that's a rather lovely thing. And then finally, there is this, and there's been a lot of discussion of this issue, which is it is just extraordinarily enjoyable when it's good, and this it comes in two ways. And I think one of them is unique to being a foreign correspondent, or particularly a conflict correspondent, and one of them is universal to all journalists, and you do not have to be in a dangerous place. And that is, the first is, when you get that nugget, when you're reporting, and suddenly that you have the story, it's a beautiful, beautiful feeling. And you will know it. And if some of you are doing, those of you here who are journalism students doing reporting, if you think about it, you'll probably recognize that. And it's like a little light goes off in your head, and you suddenly understand what the whole story is. And you obviously need to do more reporting always, but it's a lovely, lovely thing. I'll give you an example if I can. I was desperately trying to find, after the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, I was trying to find people who could, I was doing a story on bodyguards, in fact, of Saddam and Uday and Qusay, his two sons. And I just wanted to get into their world and to sort of do a little history, to see what it had been like. And I'd found 2 or 3 bodyguards, but they'd retired 5 years earlier. They weren't that interesting for me. And then I said, look, let's just stop off at a friend of mine's pharmacy in Baghdad, this pharmacist I knew. And I because I was desperate, I was really tired, I said, Saad, you don't know any bodyguards for Saddam and his sons, do you? And he said, oh yeah, well, Ahmed here, my assistant, he's got a cousin who was one of Uday Hussein's bodyguards. And I was like, yeah. So Ahmed, when did your cousin stop working for Uday, thinking that he would say, 2 years ago? He said, oh, a week after the end of the war. And I said, okay. So suddenly, and I won't bore you with the story of how we went up and met this guy, and it was just brilliant. But that moment of extraordinary access, and this guy was going to and did give a window into something that I had thought and assumed would be probably forever completely closed. What did Saddam do in the last days of his rule in Iraq, and a little bit after?